It all started on a quiet night, a night that should have been peaceful in our suburban street. But instead, flashing lights cut through the darkness. 3 men in black shirts marked HOA cop dragged my grandpa out of his chair, and I watched, helpless, as his arms snapped under their grip. That's when I made one call, and what followed changed the entire neighborhood forever. Welcome back to HOA Stories. I'm Daniel, just a regular guy living in a quiet neighborhood outside Dallas. I work long shifts at the warehouse, come home, mow my lawn, keep to myself. But when the HOA comes knocking, life is never quiet for long. And this time, they pushed too far, because they didn't just fine us for grass or trash cans. They came for my grandpa. And that's where this story begins. The street was too quiet that night. The kind of quiet that makes you hear your own heartbeat. And then, the flashing lights broke it. I remember standing on the porch, holding my phone in my hand, wondering if I should call the real police. But something inside me froze, because these men didn't look like police at all. They had black shirts, bold white letters that said HOA Cop across the back. Their SUV had a gold badge painted on the door, but the logo was crooked, cheap, like a sticker you'd buy online. Still, the neighbors peeked through their curtains. Nobody came outside, because that's how it always is here. Everybody sees, but nobody helps. My grandpa sat in his old chair by the driveway. He was 82, thin as a stick, but tough. He used to be a mechanic, hands worn and scarred from years of fixing engines, and his voice was always sharp, even when he was weak. He had that fire inside. The fake cops walked up to him like they owned the place. One of them shoved a paper in his face. Violation notice. He barked. Grandpa laughed. That dry laugh of his. What are you boys playing at? Halloween isn't till October. The man's jaw tightened. And then, without warning, he yanked Grandpa's arm. The sound. That awful crack. It's burned into my memory forever. Grandpa's cane clattered to the ground. He groaned in pain. But even then, he didn't beg. He looked them straight in the eyes and said, "You're not real cops. You're cowards." I wanted to rush forward. I wanted to fight. But my legs felt like stone. I could hear my own breath. Short, panicked, angry. The men started pulling Grandpa toward their SUV. They said it was official HOA business. But I knew better. HOA doesn't send cops at night. HOA doesn't drag old men into vans. This wasn't about rules. This was about revenge. You see, Grandpa never liked the board. At meetings he called them petty kings. Said they had too much power for people with too little sense. He embarrassed them. Told them their rules were nothing but toys for bullies, and bullies never forget. As they forced him closer to the SUV, something inside me snapped. My fear burned away, and all I felt was rage. I pulled out my phone, not to call the police, but to call family, my cousins, my brothers, not by blood, but by bond, men who lived on the edge, men who rode steel beasts that shook the streets when they passed. The first ring felt like forever. Then I heard that familiar voice. "What's wrong?" I didn't explain. I just said, "They hurt Grandpa," and then silence, followed by one promise. "We're coming." I looked back at the men. They were laughing now. One of them mocked Grandpa's cane. Another said, "Old man shouldn't run his mouth if he can't back it up." Their arrogance made my skin crawl. I kept thinking about the neighborhood, how we all lived under their rules. Mailbox 2. Oh, tall. You get fined. Grass too long. Fined. Holiday lights a week too late. Fined. And now, they thought they could fine us with fists and fake badges, but not tonight. The sound came before the sight. Engines, low and heavy, like thunder rolling down the street. At first, the men didn't notice, but I did, and for the first time that night, I smiled. Headlights filled the street. One by one, the bikes rolled in. Leather jackets, steel frames gleaming under the streetlights. It was my cousins, my biker brothers, a family built on loyalty, not rules, and they were here. The fake cops froze. Their laughter died in their throats. Grandpa, even in pain, sat taller in his chair, and I swear, his eyes lit up like fire again. The bikers cut their engines. The silence that followed was heavier than the roar. Nobody moved. The whole street felt like it was holding its breath. I stepped forward finally, my legs no longer weak. I stood between Grandpa and the fake cops, and I said the words that had been burning inside me all night. You messed with the wrong family. Their faces shifted, from smug confidence to pale fear. They weren't ready for this. They thought we were alone. They thought nobody would stand up, but they were wrong. The bikers began to circle slowly, engines revving, lights flashing across the fake badges, and I could see the panic rising in those men's eyes. One dropped his grip on Grandpa, another reached for his belt. But there was nothing there. No weapon. No authority. Just fear. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. All their strength came from the belief that we were weak. All their power came from silence. But when silence broke, so did their control. Grandpa leaned toward me, his voice rough, but steady. Don't let them take this neighborhood. Make them remember who we are. The circle tightened, engines louder now. And I knew this night would change everything, not just for Grandpa, not just for us. The bikers sat silent on their machines, engines saint, ill-warm, headlights blinding the fake cops. The men didn't know where to look. One tried to smirk, but his lips trembled. Another stepped back, his boots scraping against the pavement. They thought their fake badges gave them power. But standing against us now, they looked small. Grandpa's chair creaked as he leaned forward. His broken arm hung heavy, but his eyes burned. You see them? He whispered. They don't bow to kings. They bury them. The leader of the bikers, my cousin Mark, stepped off his Harley. His boots hit the ground with a thud that echoed through the street. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Let him go. The men hesitated, their eyes darting between Mark, the bikes, and the neighbors' windows glowing in the dark. Everyone was watching, everyone waiting, but no one moving. One of the fake cops shoved his chest out. Stay back. This is HOA business. The word sounded weak, empty. Even to him, Mark laughed, low and sharp. HOA business? At midnight? With broken bones? That's not business. That's cowardice. The other bikers revved their engines in unison. The sound was thunder, rolling through every house on the block. The ground seemed to shake beneath us. The men flinched, their confidence cracking with every roar. Grandpa raised his chin. Blood trickled from his lip where they had struck him earlier, but his voice was steady. Do it, boys. Show them what happens when you pick the wrong fight. The bikers stepped closer, tightening the circle. The fake cops had nowhere to run. One dropped his paper violation notice to the ground. It fluttered under a headlight, like a joke that was never funny to begin with. I could feel my fists clenching tighter. The anger inside me wasn't wild anymore. It was sharp, controlled, ready. I wanted them to feel every ounce of fear they had given my grandfather, Mars. He looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw him waiting for my command, not the other way around. This was my fight. This was my family, and I had to decide how far it would go. The air grew heavy. Every second felt like an hour. Would we let them walk away broken in pride, or broken in Bone Mark's eyes locked on mine? The weight of the moment pressed on my chest like a stone. The bikers waited, silent wolves ready to strike, and the fake cops stood frozen in the glare of headlights. Sweat glistened on their foreheads, their fake power slipping away. I took a step closer. The night air was cool, but inside I burned like fire. I could see their hands shaking. They weren't real enforcers. They were imposters. Petty men drunk on borrowed power. One of them tried to speak. You're making a mistake, he stammered, but his voice cracked halfway through. Another muttered something under his breath, his courage melting as the bikers revved their engines again. The sound ripped through the silence, louder, meaner, like steel growling for blood. Grandpa gripped his chair, his broken arm hanging at his side, but his voice was steady, stronger than mine. Boy, don't let them leave here untouched. They came for me. They'll come for you next. His words dug deep. I remembered the letters, the warnings, the endless fines. They had stalked us for months. Every trash can, every blade of grass, every holiday light. Grandpa told them to shove it, and this was their revenge. My rage grew sharp, like a blade, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what would happen if I fought back. I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't. Mark stepped forward. His leather jacket gleamed under the streetlight, his shadow long, dark, like a storm swallowing the road. "On your knees," he said flatly. His words weren't loud, but they were heavy, the kind of heavy that makes your bones listen. The fake cops looked at each other, desperate for a plan. One shook his head. The HOA Karen clenched his fists. The third tried to bluff with a laugh, but the laugh died quick when another biker kicked the dropped notice across the pavement. The paper spun in the dirt, a symbol of their weakness. I walked closer. I could see the cheap stitching on their shirts, the fake badges clipped on like toys. It was all an act. And that act was ending tonight. The tallest one spat on the ground. "You think you're tough. You're just criminals." Mark's grin widened. "And you're not even criminals. You're clowns." The circle tightened again, engines rumbling low like thunder under our feet. The men had no escape, not through the bikes, not through me, and not through Grandpa's burning eyes. One of them cracked first. He dropped to his knees, muttering something about just following orders. The second tried to run, but two bikers blocked him before he got 3 steps. The third still stood tall, but I could see his chest rise and fall too fast. Like a boy trying to play soldier in a war he couldn't win, Grandpa leaned forward, his voice a growl despite the pain. "Do you know what real cops do? They protect the old, not break them." His words cut deeper than any fist could. Mark tilted his head toward me, his unspoken question clear. "What do we do with them?" I walked closer, close enough to see the fear in their eyes, close enough to hear their shaky breath. I wanted to break them the way they broke Grandpa, but I also knew. Sometimes humiliation cuts deeper than pain. Still, my blood boiled. I thought of the nights Grandpa sat at the kitchen table, rubbing his temples after reading another fine letter. I thought of the smirk on the HOA president's face at every meeting. I thought of neighbors too scared to speak. And I thought of my family. Standing strong behind me now, the one on his knees begged, "Please, we didn't mean it to go this far." His weight words only made my rage sharper. Didn't mean it? They shattered an old man's arm and laughed while he screamed. Mark looked at me, waiting. The bikers growled like engines ready to strike. Grandpa's eyes never left mine, and for the first time, I felt the weight of a leader, not just a grandson, not just a neighbor, but someone who could decide what justice meant tonight. I clenched my fists tighter. I felt my nails bite into my palms. My breath slowed, sharp, steady. I wanted to say something that would echo in their heads forever, so I leaned close to the tallest one and whispered, "You thought you were wolves, but you came to the wrong house." Mark barked an order. The bikers moved as one. One grabbed the man's fake badge and ripped it off his shirt. Another yanked his belt free and tossed it into the dirt. They stripped them of every piece of their costume, leaving nothing but trembling men in cheap black shirts. The street filled with the sound of laughter now, but this time, it wasn't theirs. Neighbors watched from their windows, shadows behind curtains, and for once, I didn't care who saw. They all needed to see that fear only grows when you feed it, and tonight, we starved it out. The fake cops stood humiliated, their SUV still running, door wide open, lights flashing, but they didn't dare move toward it. Not with engines growling all around them, not with Grandpa's broken eyes burning through their souls. The bikers let the engines roar one last time, louder, louder, until it felt like the whole block shook. The men covered their ears, their fear now plain as day. I stepped back, looked at Grandpa, and in his pain, I saw pride. He nodded once, and I knew. Whatever happened next, it was ours to decide. The street smelled of oil, smoke, sweat, fear. It was no longer a place of rules and fines. It was a battleground of respect and revenge, and the night wasn't over yet. The street felt heavier with every passing second. The bikers closed in tighter, their engines still rumbling like caged thunder. The fake cops stood stripped of their false power, shirts loose, badges gone. But still, they clung to a shadow of arrogance. It was written on their faces. That desperate pride that refuses to die even when it's beaten into the dirt. Grandpa's voice cut through the night. You break an old man. You better pray his family never finds you. The words hung in the air like smoke, and the bikers growled in approval, engines revving low and mean. The tallest fake cop tried to hold his ground. He lifted his chin, though his knees trembled. You'll regret this. The HOA will bury you in lawsuits. His words felt thin, brittle, like paper in the rain. The bikers laughed. A harsh, cruel laughter that echoed off every fence on the block. Mark spat on the ground and stepped forward. Lawsuits don't scare us, but maybe we should give you something real to be scared of. I could feel it rising inside me, that raw energy, that fire that comes when fear is gone and anger takes its place. My fists ached to strike. My voice ached to roar. And then I realized, this wasn't just about Grandpa anymore. This was about every single person on our street who had been crushed by fake power and petty rules. Every letter slipped into a mailbox. Every fine shoved into a doorframe. Every warning meant to humiliate instead of protect. It all boiled over into this one moment, the second man. The one who had tried to run earlier. He dropped his eyes to the ground. His voice cracked as he whispered, "We didn't mean for it to go this far." But Mark cut him off before he could finish. "Shut your mouth. You went too far the second you touched him." The engines roared again, louder this time. The street shook beneath the weight of steel and fury. The fake cops staggered, their hands covering their ears. They looked like children cornered by a storm they couldn't escape. I took a step forward, my shadow long under the headlights. You thought Grandpa was alone. You thought you could break him and walk away laughing. But now look at you, stripped of your costumes, begging for mercy you don't deserve. The words tasted sharp on my tongue, and the more I spoke, the more their faces sank. They knew the truth now. They weren't wolves. They were sheep that dressed like predators. And tonight, the real predators had arrived. Grandpa leaned forward in his chair, pain etched across his face, but his eyes glowed with a fire I hadn't seen in years. Teach them. Make them remember this night every time they look in a mirror. Mark nodded once, and the bikers moved as one. The circle collapsed tighter. The fake cops backed up until their shoulders hit each other. No escape, no air, no dignity. One biker grabbed the arm of the tallest man, twisted it behind his back until he screamed. Another kicked the second man's legs out from under him. The third dropped to the ground, groaning in the dirt. It wasn't chaos. It wasn't wild. It was precise, controlled. The kind of justice you don't find in a courtroom, only on a street where the rules are broken. I watched. Every cry, every plea, and a strange calm washed over me. They weren't gods anymore. They weren't kings. They were frauds, reduced to what they truly were. Weak men hiding behind cheap shirts and false power. Grandpa laughed then, a dry, broken laugh that cut through their screams. You thought you could scare an old man into silence. But tonight, you'll learn what silence really feels like. The bikers forced them to their knees, their hands tied behind their backs with their own belts. The sight was surreal. 3 men who walked in like enforcers, now kneeling in the dirt like criminals caught in the act. Neighbors peeked from windows, wide-eyed. Some even cracked their doors open. For once, they weren't scared of us. They were scared of the truth, because now they saw. The HOA didn't have real power. It only had fear. And for us, ear had just been shattered. The third man, the one who had mocked Grandpa's cane earlier, he whimpered, his face pressed into the ground. "Please, just let us go." But Grandpa's voice boomed like thunder. "Did you let me go? Did you care when you heard the crack in my arm? Did you laugh when I fell?" The man sobbed quietly. His fake pride dissolved into the dirt beneath him. Mark turned to me again, his eyes asking the same question he'd asked before. What do we do now? The power rested in my hands. It was terrifying and exhilarating. I could end it with mercy, or I could end it with pain. The engines idled low. The street smelled of gasoline and sweat. The night air was cold, but my skin burned with rage. I knelt down, eye to eye with the tallest man. "You came here dressed like authority, but tonight you leave dressed in shame." I grabbed his fake badge and shoved it into the dirt before his face. "Eat it. Every lie you told, eat it now." His eyes widened, and under the laughter of bikers, under the roar of engines, He obeyed, biting down on the cheap plastic badge until it cracked between his teeth. The humiliation was complete, his pride shattered, and for the first time, I saw true fear in his eyes. The other two men shook their heads in disbelief, but they were powerless, tied, surrounded, destroyed. I stood tall again. The neighbors watching from their windows saw it too. Not a boy, not a victim, but someone who had taken back power stolen long ago. Grandpa nodded at me, his lips curling into a faint smile despite the pain. That's my grandson. The bikers began to chant low, a growl of approval, their voices mixing with the rumble of their machines. The fake cops trembled in the dirt, and I knew this night would mark them forever. But still, the question burned in my chest. Was this enough? Would humiliation alone stop them from crawling back stronger? Or did justice demand something more brutal, more permanent? The street felt alive with fire that night, engines still rumbling low, the sound crawling across every fence and rooftop. The fake cops knelt in the dirt, stripped of their badges, their arrogance gone. But still, something inside me wasn't satisfied. They had come for my family. They had broken my grandpa's arm. They had mocked us with laughter and fake uniforms. And now they sat here, begging like cowards. It didn't feel like enough. Mark placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. His grip was firm, steady, reminding me that I had the power now. His voice was calm, but sharp enough to cut glass. Whatever happens next, it's your call. The bikers stood like shadows around us, their leather vests glinting under the streetlights, their boots heavy against the pavement. They were ready for violence, but waiting for my word. I looked at Grandpa, his face pale, sweat dripping from his forehead, but his eyes burned brighter than any fire. They thought we'd stay quiet, but sometimes silence is the loudest weapon we have. The neighbors were watching now, not just from their windows. A few had stepped onto porches, some whispered in hushed tones. Others just stared wide-eyed at the scene unfolding. For years they had been afraid, but tonight they saw something new. They saw the fear running the other way. The tallest fake cop groaned as one biker twisted his arm tighter. "You'll pay for this, all of you." His words shook in his throat, like he didn't even believe them himself. I knelt close again, my voice low, controlled. "No, you're the ones paying tonight." I looked at his two partners, still pressed into the dirt. "You thought power came from a badge, but power comes from respect, and you'll never have that again." The bikers cheered. Engines revving in agreement, the noise rattled windows, made car alarms scream down the block. It fell, and like the whole neighborhood was shaking awake after years of fear, one of the men started sobbing, the one who had tried to run earlier. He pressed his face into the dirt and whispered over and over, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." But Grandpa leaned forward, his voice hoarse but steady. "Sorry doesn't put bones back together." The words hit harder than any punch. The sobbing man shook uncontrollably, his tears soaking into the pavement. The other two shifted nervously, as if hoping someone else would speak, but no one dared. The roar of the bikes silenced again, leaving nothing but the sound of shallow breaths and trembling bodies. I felt the weight of it pressing against me, the decision, the justice, the revenge. It all rested on my shoulders. I thought of the first day we moved here, how peaceful it looked, fresh paint on houses, trimmed lawns, smiling neighbors. But it was all a mask. Behind those smiles were letters, fines, threats. Behind those smiles were people who believed the HOA was untouchable. And now, untouchable men kneeled before me, and I couldn't decide if that was enough. Mark leaned close, whispering just for me, "You let them go tonight. They'll crawl back, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but they'll come again." He squeezed my shoulder tighter. "Or, we make sure tonight is the last time." The words echoed in my chest. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to finish it. But something held me back. Not fear, not weakness, but the thought of what kind of man I would become if I crossed that line. Grandpa's eyes met mine. His lips cracked into a faint smile. "You don't have to break them, boy. They're already broken." The street fell silent again. The bikers looked at me, waiting. The fake cops looked at me, praying. And I stood at the center of it all, a grandson, a son, a man caught between rage and reason. Finns, ally, I spoke. You came here to scare us. But look around. You're the ones who will never sleep peacefully again. Mark gave a short nod, and with one command, the bikers moved. They dragged the fake cops to their SUV, not gently, not kindly, but rough and merciless. One of them screamed when his head hit the doorframe. Another whimpered as he was shoved inside. Their SUV still ran. Lights flashing weakly, but it no longer looked like a tool of authority. It looked like a cage, a prison for men who had thought they were kings. Mark slammed the driver's door shut, his fist pounded against the window. Get out of this neighborhood and never come back. The bikers roared their engines again, the sound deafening, filling every corner of the block. The SUV shook as if the fear inside rattled the metal itself. Then, tires squealed as the driver threw it into reverse. They sped off into the night, taillights vanishing into the dark. The street went silent again. The only sound, the low idle of Harley's and Grandpa's labored breathing. I rushed to his side. His arm looked swollen, twisted, but his grip on my hand was firm. You did good, boy. You did good. The neighbors began to slip back inside, doors closing, curtains falling shut. But I knew they had seen it all. They would whisper about it tomorrow. They would talk about how 3 fake cops thought they owned the street and how one old man's family proved them wrong. The bikers parked their machines, their heavy boots stomping against the pavement. Mark leaned against his bike, his face calm now. You see, power only works if people believe in it. Tonight, nobody believes in them anymore. I nodded slowly, but inside, a storm still raged. Would humiliation alone keep them away? Or would they come back stronger, angrier, desperate for revenge? Grandpa leaned back in his chair. Even in pain, his smile returned. You can break a man's arm, but the real break happens here. He tapped his temple with his good hand. They'll never forget tonight. His words lingered, but doubt still gnawed at me, because some men don't stop until they're buried. The street was quiet again, too quiet. Only the low rumble of Harleys lingered in the air. Like thunder fading after a storm, Grandpa leaned back in his chair, his face pale, his arms swollen and bent at a sick angle, but his eyes still burned with pride. He had faced them, he hadn't begged, and he had lived to see them crawl away in shame. I held his hand tighter. I whispered, "It's over now." But deep inside, I wasn't sure, because men like that, they don't vanish. They wait, they plot, and they come back when you least expect it. Mark walked over, heavy boots against the pavement. He pulled a cigarette from his jacket, lit it, and blew smoke into the night. His voice was calm, steady, but cold. They'll talk to someone higher. He flicked the ash to the ground. This ain't finished. The bikers nodded in silence. They weren't celebrating. They weren't smiling. They had been through this before. They knew revenge always carried a price. I glanced around the neighborhood. Curtains shifted back into place. Doors closed quietly. Every house hiding behind its walls again. They had watched. They had seen the truth. But not one of them stepped outside to help. Not one of them said a word. That silence cut deeper than I expected. Grandpa groaned in pain. We had to get him inside. 2 bikers lifted him carefully, chair and all, his face twisted with each movement. But he didn't complain. He wouldn't give them that satisfaction. Even now. Inside, the living room smelled like old wood and oil. Grandpa's trophies lined the shelves, photos of his younger days, racing cars, fixing engines. Now they looked down on us like ghosts of a stronger time. Mark poured him a drink, whiskey burning in the glass. Grandpa sipped it, his lips trees, humbling. Then he whispered, "Don't let them scare you. Don't let them win." I nodded, but my mind was heavy. The SUV was gone, but not gone enough. Their threats still echoed in my head. "You'll regret this. The HOA will bury you in lawsuits." Maybe it was just words, or maybe it was the beginning of something darker. The bikers stayed late into the night, engines cooling on the driveway. They sat in silence, smoking, sharpening knives, waiting, as if expecting the fake cops to come roaring back any minute. But they didn't return that night. The next morning, the street looked normal again. Birds sang. Sprinklers hissed, and neighbors mowed their lawns like nothing had happened, but nothing was normal anymore. Not for me, not for Grandpa, and not for the bikers who had stood ready to bleed for family. Around noon, the letters came. 3 of them, stuffed into our mailbox, stamped with HOA seals. But inside, not fines, not warnings, just blank sheets of paper, 3 blank pages. As if mocking us with silence, Grandpa laughed bitterly. They're rattled, too scared to put words on paper. But Mark shook his head. No, this is worse. He held the blank sheets up to the light. They're sending a message. They're saying we don't even deserve an explanation. The silence in that moment was heavy. Heavier than the roar of bikes, because sometimes words cut, but silence kills slowly. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside made me sit up. Every car that passed made my chest tighten. I kept replaying the night before, the crack of Grandpa's arm, the fear in their eyes when the bikers surrounded them, the way their SUV vanished into the dark, and I wondered, was it really finished? 3 days passed. Grandpa's arm was set in a cast, the swelling went down, but his pride still swelled strong. The bikers stayed close, riding by the street every night, engines growling like watchdogs in the dark. And then, it happened. One evening, as the sun set, a black SUV parked at the far end of the street. Not the same one as before. This one was newer, cleaner. And the man who stepped out wasn't wearing a fake badge. He was in a suit, tall, broad shoulders, hair slicked back, his smile sharp as a knife. He walked slow, deliberate, every step echoing in my chest. He didn't come with a group. He didn't come with flashing lights. He came alone, which made him more dangerous. He stopped at the end of our driveway, his hands in his pockets, and with a calm voice he said, "You made a mess." Mark stood from his bike, biker brothers rising one by one behind him. Engines roared to life, but the man in the suit didn't flinch. He just smiled wider. Grandpa shifted in his chair, his cast resting on his lap. "That one of yours?" he growled, nodding toward his arm. The man chuckled. "They weren't mine, but they answered to someone above me." He tilted his head. "And now, I'm here to clean it up." My blood ran cold. This wasn't over. The fake cops were just pawns, and now, the real player had stepped onto the board. The man in the suit looked straight at me. "You think this is about one broken arm? This is bigger than you, bigger than your family, bigger than your little gang of bikers." He smirked. "You embarrassed us, and that doesn't go unanswered." The bikers revved louder, closing in, but his voice didn't shake. His smile didn't fade. If anything, he looked amused. Grandpa's jaw clenched. "Careful, boy. The higher the ladder you climb, the harder the fall." The man in the suit leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, don't worry. The fall won't be yours." Then he turned his back, walked calmly to his SUV, and drove away as if he had delivered nothing more than a casual warning. The bikers cursed, shouted after him. But I stood frozen, because deep inside, I knew the truth. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The days after that visit felt heavier than the nights before. Every morning I woke with the echo of his words. "You embarrassed us, and that doesn't go unanswered." They lingered in my chest like poison. The bikers stayed close, engines growling down the block at dusk, steel shadows guarding the house. But even their presence couldn't chase away the unease, because the man in the suit hadn't come with fists. He had come with calm. And calm was more dangerous than rage. Grandpa sat by the window every day, his cast propped on a pillow, his old eyes sharper than mine. "They'll come again," he muttered. "Not with fake badges this time, but with real teeth." I wanted to believe we were ready, but doubt chewed at me. We weren't fighting neighbors anymore. We were fighting something bigger, something hidden in plain sight. And then, the storm arrived. It was a Friday night. The street glowed under yellow lamps. The smell of barbecue drifted from 2 houses down. For a moment, life felt almost normal. But then, I heard the sound. Not Harleys this time. Not thunder from our side, but black engines. SUVs rolling in slow and steady. 3 of them, headlights cutting through the dark like knives. They stopped at the end of the street. Doors opened in unison, and men stepped out. Not in cheap shirts, not in fake badges, but in real suits, polished shoes, clean ties. They looked less like enforcers and more like businessmen. But I knew better. These weren't men who wrote fines. These were men who collected debts. Mark whistled low. Well, looks like the HOA finally sent the board of directors. The bikers rose one by one, engines roaring to life, steel against silence, leather against silk. The suited men didn't flinch. They walked forward in formation, their leader at the front, the same man who had visited before, his smile sharp as ever, hands still in his pockets, as if he were strolling into a Sunday picnic. When he reached the driveway, he stopped. The street behind him dead silent. Even the neighbors didn't peek tonight. They knew better. The kind of quiet fear that locks doors and nails windows shut. He spoke with the same calm voice as before. You think this is about broken arms, about fake cops in cheap cars, but it's not. It's about order. It's about control. And when you humiliate us, you humiliate that order. Grandpa gritted his teeth, his voice rough but steady. You call this order? Breaking bones, threatening families, hiding behind paper rules? That's not order. That's cowardice. The man chuckled softly. Cowardice? No. Cowardice is hiding behind a gang of bikers because you're too weak to face us alone. The engines roared louder. The bikers bristled at the insult, but I held up my hand. Not yet. I stepped forward, my chest heavy, my fists tight. You talk about control, but control doesn't come from fear. It comes from respect. And you lost that the second you touched my grandfather. For the first time, his smile faded, his eyes sharpened like blades, and I knew the mask was slipping. He raised one hand, and the suited men behind him reached into their jackets, the metallic click of weapons being cocked sliced through the night. Guns. Real this time, not empty threats, not fake badges, real teeth. The bikers roared their engines in defiance. But the air was heavier now. One wrong move, and the street would drown in blood. Grandpa slammed his cane against the ground. The sound cracked through the silence like a whip. Enough, he bellowed. You want to rule this street with fear? Then take your shot. But know this, you may break my bones, but you'll never break the spirit of this family. His words hit like fire. Even the bikers sat taller. Even I felt the weight lift from my chest, because in that moment, I knew we weren't just fighting for one house. We were fighting for the whole street, for every family that had been bullied into silence. Mark revved his Harley so loud it rattled the windows. The other bikers followed, engines roaring like a wall of thunder. The sound swallowed the night. The suited men flinched, weapons shaking, because no matter how polished they looked, they weren't ready to face wolves in their own den. The man in the suit glared at me, his calm finally gone, his voice low and venomous. This isn't over. He lowered his hands slowly, and his men slipped their weapons back into their coats. They turned in silence, walked back to their SUVs, and one by one, the engines roared to life. They drove off into the night, their taillights shrinking into darkness. The bikers roared louder in victory, but I stood frozen, because I knew what his words meant. This wasn't a win. This was only a warning. Grandpa leaned back in his chair, his eyes on me, proud but tired. You did good, boy, but wars don't end in one night. The bikers parked their machines, still restless. Mark lit another cigarette, exhaling smoke into the cool air. They'll come again. Maybe not here. Maybe not tomorrow. But men like that don't let things go. I nodded slowly, the fire in my chest still burning. We had stood against them once. We could do it again. But the question haunted me. Would we survive the storm they were bringing next? That night, as I lay awake, I thought about every neighbor hiding in silence, every fine, every warning, every threat. I thought about the men in suits, calm, dangerous, untouchable. And I thought about Grandpa, broken arm, but unbroken spirit. The fight wasn't over. It had only begun. And so I ask you, if a war like this started on your street, if men in suits came for your family under the name of order, would you bow your head and hide behind the curtains, or would you stand outside, face the storm, and fight for the place you call home?